The day I lost my company wasn't the day I lost everything. That happened 5 years earlier, when I looked the only man I ever loved in the eyes and pretended I didn't know his name. Noah Carter stood alone on the courthouse steps while reporters packed away their cameras, already chasing the next headline. A cold spring breeze tugged at his charcoal overcoat as cardboard boxes filled with the last pieces of his career rested beside him. His phone had stopped ringing hours ago. Investors were gone. Friends had disappeared. Even the assistants who once rushed to open every door had quietly moved on. Someone asked if he had a statement, but Noah only watched the traffic crawl through downtown Manhattan until the city lights blurred into memories. "No," he answered softly. "Not about the company." The reporter frowned. "Then what do you regret?" Noah managed a tired smile that never reached his eyes. His name was Ethan Brooks. 5 years earlier, New York had looked completely different. The skyline sparkled with possibility instead of regret, and Noah believed success only belonged to people willing to sacrifice everything else. At 28, he was the rising face of a technology startup every magazine wanted to feature. Every interview praised his discipline. Every business podcast called him fearless. None of them knew that every Friday night he escaped the endless meetings, loosened his tie, and walked 6 blocks to a tiny apartment where Ethan waited with homemade pasta, old movies, and the kind of quiet laughter that made the whole city disappear. Ethan never cared about stock prices or headlines. He celebrated small victories, remembered birthdays Noah forgot, and somehow turned takeout containers into candlelit dinners. Whenever Noah apologized for being late, Ethan would simply smile and say, "You made it." That's enough. Those words became the safest place Noah had ever known. But safety and ambition rarely shared the same room. As Noah's company attracted larger investors, whispers began following him through conference halls and networking events. Image mattered. Reputation mattered. Perception mattered. Every mentor repeated the same advice. Stay focused. Stay marketable. Stay impossible to criticize. Noah nodded every time, convincing himself that protecting the company meant protecting the future he wanted to build for both of them. Ethan believed him because Ethan always believed him. Just a little longer, Noah would promise whenever Ethan asked if they could stop hiding. "When everything settles down, I'll tell the world." Ethan laughed, kissed Noah's cheek, and squeezed his hand beneath restaurant tables where nobody was looking. "I can wait," he whispered, "as long as I'm waiting for you." Looking back, Noah realized those 6 words carried more faith than he had ever deserved. Neither of them knew that one invitation, printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock with elegant gold lettering, would quietly begin unraveling every promise they had ever made. The invitation arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, tucked between utility bills and grocery coupons, as though it carried nothing more important than another advertisement. Ethan turned the thick envelope over in his hands, smiling the moment he recognized Noah's company's elegant logo embossed in gold. Inside was an invitation to the biggest product launch of the year, an event every major business magazine had been talking about for weeks. A handwritten note rested beneath the formal card. "I want you there. It is finally time." Ethan read those 5 words over and over until they blurred together. For the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to imagine that the waiting was over. That evening, he stopped by a small boutique in Soho and bought Noah a simple silver fountain pen engraved with the initials N.C. Noah had once joked that every important chapter in his life began with a new pen. Ethan smiled to himself as the clerk wrapped it in navy paper with a white ribbon. It was not expensive, but it was thoughtful, and Ethan believed thoughtful gifts always lasted longer than extravagant ones. The night of the gala arrived with clear skies and the crisp warmth of early May. Manhattan glittered beneath thousands of lights while black cars lined up outside the historic hotel hosting the celebration. Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his navy suit before taking a slow breath. He was nervous, but it was the good kind of nervous, the kind that comes before birthdays, graduations, and dreams finally becoming real. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and conversations that sounded more like negotiations than celebrations. Noah stood near the center of the room surrounded by investors, executives, and photographers. Even from across the ballroom, Ethan could recognize the smile Noah reserved for public appearances, confident, polished, almost untouchable. Then Noah noticed him. Their eyes met for only a second, Ethan expected relief, maybe even happiness. Instead, he saw something else. Fear. Noah excused himself from the group and walked over, every measured step seeming heavier than the last. "You actually came," Noah said quietly, forcing a smile that looked rehearsed. Ethan laughed softly. "You invited me." Noah glanced over Ethan's shoulder towards several board members watching from across the room. "Things are complicated tonight." Ethan tilted his head. "You said it was finally time." Noah opened his mouth, but never answered. Before either of them could speak again, a senior investor approached with two photographers following close behind. "Noah," the investor called cheerfully, "who is your guest?" The room suddenly felt much quieter than it had a moment before. Ethan looked at Noah with complete trust, waiting for the introduction he had imagined 100 times. Noah hesitated. One heartbeat, then another. Finally he smiled, but it was not the smile Ethan knew. "I think you have the wrong person," Noah said with calm professionalism. "I do not know him." Ethan forgot how long he stood there after those words settled over the ballroom like invisible frost. Conversations resumed one cautious whisper at a time, but they no longer sounded distant. Every laugh seemed louder. Every glance lingered a little too long. The investor gave Ethan an awkward smile before turning back toward Noah, accepting the answer without another question. To everyone else, it had been a brief misunderstanding. To Ethan, it felt as though 3 years of quiet promises had vanished in a single sentence. He lowered his eyes to the neatly wrapped gift still resting in his hands. The silver ribbon suddenly looked childish among tailored tuxedos and designer gowns. Noah took one hesitant step forward. "Ethan," he began, barely above a whisper. Ethan looked up with a polite smile that somehow hurt more than tears. "Congratulations on your launch," he said evenly. "I hope tonight is everything you wanted." Before Noah could respond, another executive called his name from across the ballroom. Cameras flashed again. Investors surrounded him once more. For the first time since they had met, Noah did not chase after Ethan. He simply stood there, trapped between the future he had chosen and the past, quietly walking away. Outside, Manhattan greeted Ethan with cool night air and the constant hum of traffic. Yellow taxis rolled through wet streets reflecting thousands of city lights, each one stretching into long ribbons of gold. He walked without choosing a direction, passing crowded restaurants where strangers laughed over dinner and couples held hands without thinking twice about who might be watching. His phone vibrated once. "Noah." Ethan watched the screen until it stopped. A minute later, another message appeared. Then another. He never opened them. By the time he reached his apartment, the fountain pen was still in his pocket. He placed the unopened gift inside the top drawer of his desk and quietly closed it. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows as though nothing had changed. Ethan brewed coffee, watered the small collection of plants lining his kitchen window, and stared at the city outside for a long time. Eventually, he picked up his phone and typed a single message. "Thank you for showing me the truth. I sincerely hope your dream is worth what it cost." He pressed send, blocked Noah's number, and set the phone face down on the table. Over the following weeks, Ethan disappeared from the routines Noah had taken for granted. Their favorite coffee shop never saw him again. The bookstore where they spent rainy Sundays became another place filled only with memories. Even the landlord mentioned that apartment 4B had been vacated earlier than expected. Ethan accepted a design position in Chicago after an unexpected recommendation from a former client who admired both his work and his quiet determination. He packed everything he owned into a rented moving truck one bright Saturday morning. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no final conversations, and no promises left behind. As the skyline of New York slowly faded in his rearview mirror, Ethan whispered something almost too softly to hear. "I waited long enough." Then he faced the open highway ahead, unaware that the man who had chosen success over love had just begun losing far more than either of them could possibly imagine. Chicago greeted Ethan with quieter mornings, cleaner sidewalks, and the unfamiliar comfort of anonymity. Nobody there knew about the gala, the promises, or the man he had loved for 3 years. They only knew him as the new designer who arrived early every morning carrying a sketchbook and a travel mug filled with black coffee. The first few months were not easy. Every familiar song felt misplaced. Every celebration reminded him of another life that no longer belonged to him. More than once, his fingers hovered over Noah's blocked contact before he quietly set his phone aside. Healing, he discovered, was rarely dramatic. It happened in ordinary moments. It happened while laughing with coworkers over lunch, staying late to perfect a design, or walking along the Chicago River as autumn leaves drifted across the water. Little by little, the weight on his chest became lighter. His confidence returned one project at a time. Clients admired not only his creativity, but also his ability to tell stories through color, light, and emotion. Within 3 years, Ethan had become the youngest creative director in the firm's history. His work appeared in national advertising campaigns, museum exhibitions, and international design conferences. The recognition never changed him. He still preferred neighborhood bookstores over luxury parties and handwritten notes over expensive gifts. Meanwhile, nearly 800 miles away, Noah's carefully constructed world developed its first crack. At first it seemed insignificant. A promising merger collapsed after months of negotiations. One investor quietly withdrew support, followed by another. Board meetings became longer. Smiles became shorter. Advisors who once praised every decision suddenly questioned every strategy. Noah responded the only way he knew how. He worked harder. He slept less. He convinced himself that success always required another sacrifice. But this time there was nothing left to sacrifice except pieces of himself. Headlines slowly changed their tone. The visionary entrepreneur became the executive under pressure. Financial magazines that once celebrated his bold leadership began asking uncomfortable questions about declining growth and failed expansion plans. Noah spent countless nights alone in his office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, staring at spreadsheets that refused to improve no matter how many hours he poured into them. Sometimes he would catch his reflection in the dark window and barely recognize the exhausted stranger staring back. One rainy evening, while searching for an old contract inside a forgotten desk drawer, Noah found a faded movie ticket tucked inside a notebook. It had been from their first official date. Ethan had insisted on seeing an old black and white film because he claimed great stories never became outdated. Noah remembered laughing when Ethan cried over the ending even though he had already watched the movie twice before. Without thinking, Noah opened the bottom drawer beside his desk. Inside rested a small navy gift box that had been delivered to his office the morning after the gala. His assistant had assumed it came from a client and stored it away. Noah untied the ribbon with trembling hands and lifted the lid. Resting inside was the silver fountain pen engraved with his initials. Beneath it lay a folded note written in Ethan's familiar handwriting. It contained only one sentence. "I hope every beautiful future you write reminds you of the person who believed in it first." Noah closed his eyes as the silence around him became almost unbearable, realizing that the most valuable thing he had ever been given had been waiting, unopened, while everything else slowly slipped away. 5 years passed before fate quietly crossed their paths again. Noah had stopped searching with hope long ago. At first he had hired private investigators, contacted mutual friends, and even visited the apartment building where Ethan had once lived, but every trail ended the same way. Ethan Brooks had simply built a new life beyond the reach of old memories. Time continued moving whether Noah was ready or not. His company survived for a while, then slowly unraveled under financial pressure, failed partnerships, and a reputation that no longer inspired confidence. When the final contracts disappeared and the board voted to dissolve what remained of the business, Noah accepted the outcome without argument. Some losses could be blamed on the economy. Others belonged entirely to the choices a person made. A month later, with no schedule to follow for the first time in years, Noah accepted an invitation to speak at a creative leadership conference in Chicago. It was a modest event compared to the glamorous stages he once preferred, but something about starting over in a smaller room felt strangely appropriate. He finished his presentation, answered a few thoughtful questions, and wandered through the exhibition hall where local artists and design firms displayed their newest work. Then he stopped walking. Across the room, beneath warm gallery lights, stood a man adjusting framed illustrations while speaking with a group of visitors. His dark blue blazer fit perfectly, his smile came easily, and there was a calm confidence in the way he listened before answering each question. Noah recognized him immediately, even before he turned around. Ethan. For a long moment Noah forgot how to breathe. The room remained full of conversation, footsteps, and quiet music, yet everything around him seemed to fade into the background. Ethan laughed at something a visitor said, thanked them for coming, and accepted another handshake before finally glancing toward the entrance. Their eyes met across the gallery. Noah expected surprise, maybe anger. Instead, Ethan simply looked at him with polite curiosity, as though seeing someone from another chapter of life. After excusing himself from the group, Ethan walked over at an unhurried pace. "Noah," he said with a small, courteous smile. "It has been a long time." Noah searched desperately for the right words, but none of the speeches that had once impressed investors seemed useful anymore. "You look happy," he managed to say. Ethan nodded gently. "I am. Chicago has been good to me." The answer was simple, honest, and strangely comforting. There was no bitterness hiding beneath it. No sharp accusation waiting to be delivered. Only peace. They stood together for a moment, surrounded by colorful artwork and the soft murmur of strangers discussing creativity and possibility. Noah noticed a wedding ring was not on Ethan's hand, then immediately felt ashamed for looking. He no longer had any claim to wonder about Ethan's personal life. "Congratulations," Noah said quietly. "Your work is incredible." Ethan smiled with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. I worked very hard for it." The words carried no arrogance, only quiet pride earned through years of rebuilding. Before either of them could continue, another attendee approached Ethan with questions about an upcoming exhibition. Ethan turned back to Noah with the same calm expression. "It was nice seeing you again. Enjoy the conference." Then he walked away without hesitation, leaving Noah standing exactly where he was, finally understanding that the hardest kind of distance was not measured in miles. It was measured by becoming a stranger to the person who once knew your heart better than anyone else. Noah remained in Chicago after the conference officially ended, telling himself he simply wanted to explore the city before returning to New York. The truth was much harder to admit. For the first time in 5 years, Ethan was no longer a memory hidden behind unanswered questions. He was real, only a few miles away, living a life Noah had once promised to share. 2 mornings later, Noah found himself standing outside a quiet neighborhood coffee shop after noticing Ethan's name on the schedule for a community design workshop advertised online. He almost turned around 3 separate times before finally stepping inside. The room smelled of fresh espresso, cedar bookshelves, and warm pastries. Sunlight streamed through tall windows where local artists sketched in notebooks, while soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Ethan stood near a long wooden table helping a college student adjust a portfolio presentation. His patience looked effortless. His encouragement sounded sincere. He was still the same man who believed people could become better versions of themselves if someone simply believed in them first. When the workshop ended, Ethan noticed Noah waiting near the entrance. There was a brief pause before he walked over with the same composed smile as before. "You stayed in Chicago," Ethan observed. Noah nodded. "I was hoping we could talk. Really talk. Just once." Ethan studied him quietly for several seconds before glancing toward a nearby park across the street. "There is a bench overlooking the river. We can sit there for a little while." They crossed together without speaking, the breeze carrying the scent of spring flowers through the tree-lined sidewalks. Boats drifted slowly across the water while cyclists passed with cheerful greetings. It felt like a place where difficult conversations could finally breathe. Noah rested his hands together, searching for words that had taken years to find. "I have replayed that night thousands of times," he said. "Not because I wanted to justify what I did, but because I kept wishing I had chosen differently." Ethan remained silent, allowing him to continue. "People assumed I cared more about money than love. That was never true. I cared too much about fear. Investors warned me that any distraction could damage the company. Advisors told me my personal life would become a target. I believed that if I protected my image for a few more months, I could build a future where nobody could question us again." Noah looked down at his hands. "Instead, I destroyed the very future I claimed I was protecting." Ethan let out a slow breath, watching the sunlight ripple across the river. "I spent a long time wondering whether I had imagined everything between us," he admitted quietly. "For months I questioned my own memories because of one sentence." Noah closed his eyes. The words landed heavier than any business failure he had ever faced. "You never imagined it," he whispered. "I loved you every single day." I was simply too afraid to love you honestly when it mattered most. Ethan finally turned toward him, his expression gentle but unreadable. Loving someone is important, Noah. Choosing them is even more important. Those are not always the same thing. Neither man spoke after that. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was simply honest, carrying the weight of years that could never be rewritten, only understood. The conversation by the river ended without promises, and Noah respected that. He did not ask Ethan to meet again. He did not send long messages or leave unexpected gifts at his office. For the first time in his life, he understood that remorse did not earn forgiveness. If he truly wanted to honor the man he had once hurt, he needed to stop asking for another chance and start becoming someone worthy of one, even if Ethan never witnessed it. Over the following weeks, Noah quietly settled into Chicago, taking consulting work for small family businesses instead of chasing billion-dollar valuations. The work was modest, but it felt honest. He spent his mornings helping neighborhood entrepreneurs organize finances, rewrite business plans, and avoid the same mistakes that pride had once hidden from him. Nobody treated him like a celebrity, and he found unexpected peace in that. One afternoon, he overheard two cafe owners discussing a local arts initiative that had suddenly lost a major sponsor only a month before its annual exhibition. Without asking who organized the event, Noah offered to review their fundraising strategy free of charge. He spent several evenings contacting former business partners who still respected his judgment, convincing local companies to contribute supplies, venue support, and promotional space instead of cash. He never mentioned his own name in the campaign materials. He only wanted the exhibition to survive. A week later, Ethan arrived at the planning meeting expecting another difficult conversation about budget cuts. Instead, the event coordinator greeted him with a relieved smile. "Someone worked, eh?" "Miracle," she said, handing Ethan a revised spreadsheet. "Every major expense has been covered." Ethan scanned the pages with quiet surprise. Printing costs reduced. Venue donated. Local sponsors confirmed. Transportation provided. It almost looked impossible. "Who arranged all of this?" he asked. The coordinator shrugged. "A consultant." He refused public credit. Said the event mattered more than his reputation. Ethan thanked her, but something about the answer lingered in his mind. Several days later, while leaving the exhibition hall after another planning session, Ethan spotted Noah across the street speaking with the owner of a neighborhood bookstore. Noah smiled politely, shook the older man's hand, and walked away carrying nothing except a worn leather notebook. He never looked toward the gallery. Ethan stood still for a long moment before quietly continuing home. Another month passed, and the exhibition opened to its largest attendance in years. Families wandered through colorful installations, students filled sketchbooks with inspiration, and local musicians performed beneath strings of warm lights. During the closing ceremony, the organizer thanked dozens of volunteers by name, yet one person remained absent from the list. Ethan noticed because he already knew who had asked to stay invisible. That evening, as the crowd slowly disappeared into the cool Chicago night, Ethan found a small envelope resting beside his portfolio on the backstage table. Inside was a single handwritten note. There was no signature, only familiar handwriting. "Some mistakes can never be erased, but I hope the future I once failed to protect becomes brighter because of the person you have become." Ethan folded the note carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. For the first time in years, he did not feel the sharp ache of old memories. Instead, he felt something quieter, something unfamiliar. Respect had returned long before trust, and somehow that made all the difference. Autumn arrived quietly, painting Chicago in shades of amber and gold. Ethan found himself thinking about Noah less often, yet with far less pain than before. The memories had changed. They no longer felt like open wounds. They felt like old photographs, meaningful but no longer capable of stopping time. One crisp Saturday morning, Ethan received an unexpected phone call from the director of a nonprofit arts foundation. A large community center on the city's south side had lost its primary funding only weeks before opening a free creative program for children. The director sounded exhausted. "We have volunteers. We have teachers. We even have donated supplies. But without financial planning, we might have to cancel everything." Ethan agreed to attend an emergency meeting that afternoon. When he walked into the conference room, he froze for just a fraction of a second. Noah was already there, sleeves rolled up, standing beside a whiteboard covered with budgets, timelines, and handwritten notes. He looked up, equally surprised, but offered only a small nod before returning to the discussion. There was no awkward attempt at conversation, no dramatic apology, only quiet professionalism. For the next 4 hours they worked side by side, solving problems the way they once had years ago while building dreams together in a tiny apartment. Ethan focused on design, volunteers, and community outreach. Noah reorganized expenses, negotiated vendor discounts, and convinced local businesses to contribute services instead of money. Their skills still fit together naturally, almost effortlessly, yet both men respected the careful distance that now existed between them. As the meeting ended, the director smiled with visible relief. "You two make an incredible team." Ethan and Noah exchanged a brief glance before politely looking away. Outside, the evening air carried the scent of fallen leaves and fresh rain. They walked toward the parking lot in comfortable silence until Ethan finally spoke. "You could have told them about everything you have done these past few months." Noah shook his head. "That was never the point." Ethan stopped walking. "Then what was?" Noah considered the question for a long moment before answering. "There was a time when I believed love meant convincing someone to wait for me while I chased the future. I was wrong. Love should make another person's life brighter, even if they eventually choose a path that no longer includes you." Ethan searched Noah's face, looking for the ambitious executive who had once feared public opinion more than honesty. That man seemed gone. Standing before him was someone quieter, humbler, and somehow stronger than before. Noah smiled gently, almost sadly. "You do not owe me forgiveness, Ethan. You do not owe me friendship either. If meeting me only reminds you of pain, I will leave Chicago tomorrow. I mean that sincerely. I wanted one thing before I disappeared from your life for good. I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I should have understood years ago." Ethan remained silent, his heart unexpectedly unsteady. Noah reached into his coat pocket, removed a small business card, and placed it on a nearby bench instead of handing it directly to Ethan. "If you ever need professional help with a project, call me. If you never do, that is perfectly all right too." He stepped back with a peaceful smile. "Choose the life that makes you happiest. This time, I will not ask you to wait for me." Then Noah turned and walked away beneath the rows of golden trees, never once looking back, leaving Ethan standing alone with the realization that sometimes the greatest proof of love was finally learning how to let someone go. Nearly a year passed before Ethan saw Noah again. Winter had melted into spring, and the city seemed to breathe a little easier beneath clear blue skies and blooming trees. Ethan stood outside a renovated brick building on the north side of Chicago, where a crowd of friends, clients, artists, and neighbors gathered for the grand opening of his own creative studio. It had taken years of late nights, careful planning, and quiet determination to reach this moment. Above the entrance, a simple sign displayed the name Brooks Creative Studio. No flashing lights, no oversized banners, just a dream finally given a permanent address. Guests wandered through the gallery, admiring colorful illustrations and community projects that celebrated ordinary people finding extraordinary hope. Ethan thanked each visitor personally, remembering names, listening to stories, and laughing, more freely than he had in years. As the afternoon drew to a close, the receptionist approached with a puzzled smile. "Someone dropped these off earlier," she said, handing Ethan a small bouquet of white lilies. Attached was a handwritten card with no signature. "Congratulations. Build every future you once imagined." Ethan smiled before carefully folding the note into his jacket pocket. He knew exactly who had written it. Looking through the front window, he noticed a familiar figure across the street preparing to leave. Noah stood quietly beside the sidewalk, hands tucked into his coat pockets, already turning away after making certain the flowers had been delivered. He had not come inside. He had not expected an invitation. Ethan stepped through the front door before he could overthink the decision. "Noah." The single word stopped him. Noah turned slowly, surprised to find Ethan walking toward him with the bouquet still in his hands. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The city moved around them as pedestrians crossed intersections, buses rolled past, and the afternoon sunlight reflected from nearby windows. Finally, Ethan smiled. "You were really going to leave without saying hello?" Noah gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "I did not want to interrupt your day. It belongs to you." Ethan looked down at the flowers before meeting Noah's eyes again. Would you like to see the studio? Noah hesitated. Only if you truly want me there. Ethan answered without hesitation this time. I would not have asked otherwise. They walked inside together. Friends greeted Ethan warmly, and he introduced Noah simply by his name. Nothing more, nothing less. For Noah, those few ordinary words meant more than any public speech ever could. As the evening settled over the city and the final guests slowly departed, they found themselves standing by the large front windows overlooking the quiet street. Noah spoke softly. I cannot change who I was. Ethan nodded. No, but I have seen who you chose to become. Silence settled between them, peaceful instead of painful. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key attached to a simple leather keychain. There is a spare key to the studio, he said. Not because I expect anything from you. Because trust begins with small things. Noah accepted it carefully, as though it were the most fragile object in the world. His eyes glistened with gratitude rather than certainty. They both understood that love was not returning in one perfect moment. It would grow slowly through honesty, patience, and countless ordinary days. This time there were no promises about waiting for the future. The future had already arrived, and together they stepped forward to meet it.